Hello, everyone, and welcome back for our next part of Chapter 6 of Good Omens. I'm thinking we'll probably be in this chapter for maybe 2 or 3 more sessions of this after this. We'll see. We were on track to finish up by next week, around, uh, but I don't really have an estimate of when we were going to finish, but I think that that's not likely to happen at this point because I missed yesterday. Sorry about that, by the way. There were people working on my gas line for a lot of the day yesterday, so yeah, there was too much banging, and by the time they were gone, I thought it was too late for a read. So I am going to go ahead and continue here with the next section. And I'm sorry we only got 3 in this week. So, where we left off, Haster had escaped from the Ansophone prison that he was in. The 4 bikers of the apocalypse are still on their way there. And Aziraphale has possessed the body of Madame Tracy and is now heading there with Sergeant Shadwell while continuing to be inside her. So everybody's kind of converging on Tadfield, where Adam is. So, let's continue, shall we? You wouldn't have known it as the same car. There was scarcely an inch of it undented. Both front lights were smashed. The hubcaps were long gone. It looked like the victim of 100 demolition derbies. The pavements had been bad. The pedestrian underpass had been worst. The worst bit had been crossing the River Thames. At least he'd had the foresight to roll up all the windows. Still, he was here now. In a few hundred yards he'd be on the M40, a fairly clear run up to Oxfordshire. There was only one snag. Once more between Crowley and the open road was the M25. A screaming, glowing ribbon of pain and dark light. Not actually an oxymoron. It's the color past ultraviolet. The technical term for it is infra-black. It can be seen quite easily under experimental conditions. To perform the experiment, simply select a healthy brick wall with a good run-up, and lowering your head, charge. The color that flashes in bursts behind your eyes, behind the pain, just before you die, is infra-black. Odegra. Nothing could cross it and survive. Nothing mortal, anyway. And he wasn't sure what it would do to a demon. It couldn't kill him, but it wouldn't be pleasant. There was a police roadblock in front of the flyover before him. Burnt-out wrecks, some still burning, testified to the fate of previous cars that had tried to drive across the flyover above the dark road. The police did not look happy. Crowley shifted down into second gear and gunned the accelerator. He went through the roadblock at 60. That was the easy bit. Cases of spontaneous human combustion are on record all over the world. One minute someone's quite happily chugging along with their life. The next there's a sad photograph of a pile of ashes and a lonely and mysteriously uncharred foot or hand. Cases of spontaneous vehicular combustion are less well documented. Whatever the statistics were, they had just gone up by 1. The leather seat covers began to smoke. Staring ahead of him, Crowley fumbled left-handedly on the passenger seat for Agnes Nutter's nice and accurate prophecies, moved it to the safety of his lap. He wished she'd prophesied this. She had. It read, "A street of light will scream, the black chariot of the serpent will flame, and a queen will sing quicksilver songs no more." Most of the family had gone along with Gelatly device, who wrote a brief monograph in the 1830s explaining it as a metaphor for the banishment of Weishaupt's Illuminati from Bavaria in 1785. Then the flames engulfed the car. He had to keep driving. On the other side of the flyover was a further police roadblock to prevent the passage of cars trying to come into London. They were laughing about a story that had just come over the radio, that a motorbike cop on the M6 had flagged down a stolen police car only to discover the driver had been a large octopus. Some police forces would believe anything. Not the Metropolitan Police, though. The Met was the hardest, most cynically pragmatic, most stubbornly down-to-earth police force in Britain. It would take a lot to phase a copper from the Met. It would take, for example, a huge battered car that was nothing more nor less than a fireball, a blazing, roaring, twisted metal lemon from hell, driven by a grinning lunatic in sunglasses sitting amid the flames, trailing thick black smoke, coming straight at them through the lashing rain and wind at 80 miles per hour. That would do it every time. The quarry was the calm center of a stormy world. Thunder didn't just rumble overhead, it tore the air in half. "I've got some more friends coming," Adam repeated. "They'll be here soon, and then we can really get started." Dogs started to howl. It was no longer the siren howl of a lone wolf, but the weird oscillations of a small dog in deep trouble. Pepper had been sitting staring at her knees. There seemed to be something on her mind. Finally, she looked up and stared Adam in the blank gray eyes. "What bit are you gonna have, Adam?" she said. The storm was replaced by a sudden ringing silence. "What?" said Adam. "Well, you divided up the world, right? And we've all got us to have a bit. What bit are you going to have?" The silence sang like a harp, high and thin. "Yeah," said Brian. "You never told us what bit you're having." "Pepper's right," said Wensleydale. "Don't seem to me there's much left if we've got to have all these countries." Adam's mouth opened and shut. "What?" he said. "What bit's yours, Adam?" said Pepper. Adam stared at her. Dog had stopped howling and had fixed his master with an intent, thoughtful, mongrel stare. "Me?" he said. The silence went on and on, one note that could drown out the noises of the world. "But I'll have Tadfield," said Adam. They stared at him. And Lower Tadfield, and Norton Woods?" They still stared. Adam's gaze dragged itself across their faces. "They're all I've ever wanted," he said. They shook their heads. "I can have 'em if I want," said Adam, his voice tinged with sullen defiance, and his defiance edged with sudden doubt. "I can make them better, too. Better trees to climb, better ponds, better—" His voice trailed off. "You can't," said Wensleydale flatly. "They're not like America and those places. They're really real. Anyway, they belong to all of us. They're ours." "And you can't make 'em better," said Brian. "Anyway, even if you did, we'd all know," said Pepper. "Oh, if that's all that's worrying you, don't worry," said Adam airily. "'Cause I could just make you all just do whatever I wanted." He stopped, his ears listening in horror to the words his mouth was speaking. The them were backing away. Dog put his paws over his head. Adam's face looked like an impersonation of the collapse of empire. "No!" he said hoarsely. "No, come back! I command you!" They froze in mid-dash. Adam stared. "No, I didn't mean it," he began. "You're my friends." His body jerked. His head was thrown back. He raised his arms and pounded the sky with his fists. His face twisted. The chalk floor cracked under his sneakers. Adam opened his mouth and screamed. It was a sound that a merely mortal throat should not have been able to utter. It wound out of the quarry, mingled with the storm, caused the clouds to curdle into new and unpleasant shapes. It went on and on. It resounded around the universe, which is a good deal smaller than physicists would believe. It rattled the celestial spheres. It spoke of loss, and it did not stop for a very long time. And then it did. Something drained away. Adam's head tilted down again. His eyes opened. Whatever had been standing in the old quarry before, Adam Young was standing there now. A more knowledgeable Adam Young, but Adam Young nevertheless. Possibly more of Adam Young than there had ever been before. A ghastly silence in the quarry was replaced by a more familiar, comfortable silence, the mere and simple absence of noise. The freed them cowered against the chalk cliff, their eyes fixed on him. "It's all right," said Adam quietly. "Pepper? Wensley? Brian, come back here. It's all right. It's all right. I know everything now. And you've got to help me. Otherwise it's all going to happen. It's really all going to happen. It's all going to happen if we don't do something." The plumbing in Jasmine Cottage heaved and rattled and showered Newt with water that was slightly khaki in color. But it was cold. It was probably the coldest cold shower Newt had ever had in his life. It didn't do any good. "There's a red sky," he said when he came back. He was feeling slightly manic. "At 4:30 in the afternoon, in August. What does that mean? In terms of delighted nautical operatives, would you say? I mean, if it takes a red sky at night to delight a sailor, what does it take to amuse the man who operates the computers on a supertanker? Or is it shepherds who are delighted at night? I can never remember." Anathema eyed the plaster in his hair. The shower hadn't gotten rid of it, it had merely dampened it down and spread it out, so that Newt looked as though he was wearing a white hat with hair in it. "You must have got quite a bump," she said. "No, that was when I hit my head on the wall. You know, when you..." "Yes." Anathema looked quizzically out of the broken window. "Would you say it's blood-coloured?" she said. "It's very important." "I wouldn't say that," said Newt, his train of thought temporarily derailed. "Not actual blood. More pinkish. Probably the storm put a lot of dust in the air." Anathema was rummaging through the nice and accurate prophecies. "What are you doing?" he said. "Trying to cross-reference. I still can't be..." "I don't think you need to bother," said Newt. "I know what the rest of 3477 means. It came to me when I..." "What do you mean you know what it means?" "I was on my way... I saw it on my way down here. And don't snap like that. My head aches. I mean, I saw it. They've got it written down outside that airbase of yours. It's got nothing to do with peas. It's peace is our profession. It's the kind of thing they put up on boards outside airbases. You know, SAC 86577 45th Wing, the Screaming Blue Demons, peace is our profession, that sort of thing." Newt clutched his head. The euphoria was definitely fading. "If Agnes is right, then there's probably some madman in there right now winding up all the missiles and cranking open the launch windows. Or whatever they are." "No, there isn't," said Anathema firmly. "Oh, yes? I've seen films. Name me one good reason why you can't be so sure." "There aren't any bombs there, or missiles. Everyone round here knows that." "But it's an airbase. It's got runways." "That's just for transport planes and things. All they've got up there is communications gear. Radios and stuff. Nothing explosive at all." Newt stared at her. "Look at Crowley doing 110 miles per hour on the M40 heading toward Oxfordshire. Even the most resolutely casual observer would notice a couple of strange things about him. The clenched teeth, for example, or the dull red glow coming from behind his sunglasses. And the car. The car was a definite hint. Crowley had started the journey in his Bentley, and he was damned if he wasn't going to finish it in the Bentley as well. Not that even the kind of car buff who owns his own pair of motoring goggles would have been able to tell it was a vintage Bentley. Not anymore. They wouldn't have even been able to tell it was a Bentley. They would only offer 50-50 that it had ever even been a car. There was no paint left on it for a start. It might still have been black, where it wasn't a rusty, smudged reddish-brown, but this was a dull, charcoal black. It traveled in its own ball of flame, like a space capsule making a particularly difficult re-entry. There was a thin skin of crusted metal rubber left around the metal wheel rims, but seeing that the wheel rims were still somehow riding an inch above the road surface, this didn't seem to make an awful lot of difference to the suspension. It should have fallen apart miles back. It was the effort of holding it together that was causing Crowley to grit his teeth, and the biospatial feedback that was causing the bright red eyes. That and the effort of having to remember not to start breathing. He hadn't felt like this since the 14th century. The atmosphere in the quarry was friendlier now, but still intense. "You've got to help me sort it out," said Adam. "People have been trying to sort it out for thousands of years, but we've got to sort it out now." They nodded helpfully. "You see, the thing is," said Adam, "this thing is, it's like, well, you know Greasy Johnson?" The them nodded. They all knew Greasy Johnson and the members of the other gang in Lower Tadfield. They were older and not very pleasant. Hardly a week went by without a skirmish. "Well," said Adam, "we always win, right?" "Nearly always," said Wensleydale. "Nearly always," said Adam. "And more than half, anyway," said Pepper. "'Cause you remember when there was all that fuss over the old folks' party in the village hall when we—" "That doesn't count," said Adam. "They just got told off just as much as us. Anyway, old folks are supposed to like listening to the sound of children playing. I read that somewhere. I don't see why we should get told off because we've got the wrong kind of old folks." He paused. "Anyway, we're better than them." "Oh, we're better than them," said Pepper. "You're right about that. We're better than them, all right. We just don't always win." "Just suppose," said Adam slowly, "that we could beat 'em properly. Get 'em sent away or something. Just make sure there's no more old gangs in Lower Tadfield apart from us. What do you think about that?" "What, you mean he'd be dead?" said Brian. "No, just gone away." The them thought about this. Greasy Johnson had been a fact of life ever since they'd been old enough to hit one another with a toy railway engine. They tried to get their minds around the concept of the world with a Johnson-shaped hole in it. Brian scratched his nose. "I reckon it'd be brilliant without Greasy Johnson," he said. "Remember what he did at my birthday party? And I got in trouble about it." "I don't know," said Pepper. "I mean, it wouldn't be so interesting without old Greasy Johnson and his gang. When you think about it, we've had a lot of fun with old Greasy Johnson and the Johnsonites. We'd probably have to find some other gang or something." "Seems to me," said Wensleydale, "that if you asked people in Lower Tadfield, they'd say they'd be better off without the Johnsonites or the them." Even Adam looked shocked at this. Wensleydale went on stoically. "The old folks club would, and Picky, and—" "But we're the good ones," Brian began. He hesitated. "Well, all right," he said. "But I bet they'd think it'd be a jolly sight less interesting if we weren't all here." "Yes," said Wensleydale. "That's what I mean. People round here don't want us or the Johnsonites," he went on morosely. "The way they're always going on about us just riding our bikes or skateboarding on their pavements and making too much noise and stuff. It's like the man said in the history books, a plaque on both your houses." This met with silence. "Are those little blue ones?" said Brian eventually. "Saying Adam Young lived here or something?" Normally, an opening like this could lead to 5 minutes rambling discussion when the them were in the mood, but Adam felt that this was not the time. "What you're all saying," he summed up in his best chairman tones, "is that it wouldn't be any good at all if the Greasy Johnsonites beat the them or the other way around." "That's right," said Pepper. "Because," she added, "if we beat them, we'd have to be our own deadly enemies. It'd be me and Adam against Brian and Wensley." She sat back. "Everyone needs a Greasy Johnson," she said. "Yeah," said Adam. "That's what I thought. It's no good anyone winning. That's what I thought." He stared at Dog, or through Dog. "Seems simple enough to me," said Wensleydale, sitting back. "I don't see why it's taken thousands of years to sort out." "It's because the people trying to sort it out were men," said Pepper meaningfully. "Don't see why you have to take sides," said Wensleydale. "Of course I have to take sides," said Pepper. "Everyone has to take sides in something." Adam appeared to reach a decision. "Yes, but I reckon you can make your own side. I think you better go and get your bikes," he said quietly. "I think we better sort of go and talk to some people." Put, 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 went Madame Tracy's motor scooter down Crouch End High Street. It was the only vehicle moving on a suburban London street jammed with immobile cars and taxis and red London buses. "I've never seen a traffic jam quite like it," said Madame Tracy. "I wonder if there's been an accident." "Quite possibly," said Aziraphale. And then, "Mr. Shadwell, unless you put your arms round me, you're going to fall off. This thing wasn't built for 2 people, you know." "3, muttered Shadwell, gripping the seat with one white-knuckled hand and his thunder gun with the other. "Mr. Shadwell, I won't tell you again." "You'll have to stop so as I can adjust me weapon," sighed Shadwell. Madame Tracy giggled dutifully, but she pulled over to the curb and stopped the motor scooter. Shadwell sorted himself out and put 2 grudging arms around Madame Tracy, while the thunder gun stuck up between them like a chaperone. They rode through the rain without talking for another 10 minutes, put, as Madame Tracy carefully negotiated her way around the cars and the buses. Madame Tracy found her eyes being moved down to the speedometer, rather foolishly, she thought, since it hadn't worked since 1974, and it hadn't worked very well before that. "Dear lady, how fast would you say we were going?" asked Aziraphale. "Why?" "Because it seems to me that we would go slightly faster walking." "Well, with just me on, the top speed is about 15 miles an hour, but with Mr. Shadwell as well, it must be about 4 or 5 miles per hour," she interrupted. I suppose so, she agreed. There was a cough from behind her. Can you slow down this hellish machine, woman? Asked an ashen voice. In the infernal pantheon, which it goes without saying Shadwell hated uniformly and correctly, Shadwell reserved a special loathing for speed demons. In which case, said Aziraphale, we will get to Tadfield in something less than 10 hours. There was a pause from Madame Tracy then. How far away is this Tadfield, anyway? About 40 miles. Said Madame Tracy, who had once driven the scooter the few miles to nearby Finchley to visit her niece, but had taken the bus since because of the funny noises the scooter had started making on the way back. We should really be going at about 70 if we're going to get there in time, said Aziraphale. Sergeant Shadwell, hold on very tight now. Put, and a blue nimbus began to outline the scooter and its occupants with a gentle sort of glow, like an afterimage all around them. And the scooter lifted awkwardly off the ground with no visible means of support, jerking slightly, until it reached a height of 5 feet, more or less. Don't look down, Sergeant Shadwell, said Shadwell, eyes screwed tightly shut, grey forehead beaded with sweat, and not looking down, not looking anywhere. And off we go, then. In every big-budget science fiction movie, there's the moment when a spaceship as large as New York suddenly goes to light speed. A twanging noise like a wooden ruler being plucked over the edge of the desk, a dazzling refraction of light, and suddenly the stars have all been stretched out thin and it's gone. This was exactly like that, except instead of a gleaming 12-mile-long spaceship, it was an off-white 20-year-old motor scooter. And you didn't have the special rainbow effects, and it probably wasn't going at more than 200 miles an hour, and instead of a pulsing whine sliding up into the octaves, it just went put, vroosh. But it was exactly like that anyway. Where the M25 now... Where the M25, now a screaming frozen circle, intersects with the M40 to Oxfordshire, people were clustered around in ever-increasing quantities. Since Crowley crossed the divide half an hour earlier, their number had doubled. On the M40 side, anyway, no one in London was getting out. In addition to the police, there were also approximately 200 others standing around and inspecting the M25 through binoculars. They included representatives from Her Majesty's Army, the Bomb Disposal Squad, MI5, MI6, the Special Branch, and the CIA. There was also a man selling hot dogs. Everybody was cold and wet and puzzled and irritable, with the exception of one police officer, who was cold, wet, puzzled, irritable, and exasperated. Look, I don't care if you believe me or not, he sighed. All I'm telling you is what I saw. It was an old car, a Rolls or a Bentley, one of those flash vintage jobs, and it made it over the bridge. One of the senior army technicians interrupted. It can't have done. According to our instruments, the temperature above the M25 is somewhere in excess of 700 degrees centigrade. Or 140 degrees below, added his assistant. Or 140 degrees below zero, added the senior technician. There does appear to be some confusion on that score, though I think we can safely attribute it to mechanical error of some kind. This was true. There wasn't a thermometer on Earth that could have been persuaded to register both 700 degrees Celsius and negative 140 degrees Celsius at the same time, which was the correct temperature. But the fact remains that we can't even get a helicopter directly over the M25 without winding up with helicopter McNuggets. How on earth can you tell me that a vintage car drove over it unharmed? I didn't say it drove over it unharmed, corrected the policeman, who was thinking seriously about leaving the Metropolitan Police and going into business with his brother, who was resigning his job with the electricity board and was going to start breeding chickens. It burst into flames! It just kept on going! Do you seriously expect any of us to believe? Began somebody. A high-pitched keening noise, haunting and strange, like 1,000 glass harmonicas being played in unison, all slightly off-key, like the sound of the molecules of the air itself wailing in pain. And whoosh! Over their heads it sailed, 40 feet in the air, engulfed in a deep blue nimbus which faded to red at the edges. A little white motor scooter, and riding it, a middle-aged woman in a pink helmet, and holding tightly to her, a short man in a Macintosh and a day-glow green crash helmet. The motor scooter was too far up for anyone to see that his eyes were tightly shut, but they were. The woman was screaming. What she was screaming was this. Geronimo! One of the advantages of the wasabi, as Newt was always keen to point out, was that when it was badly damaged, it was very hard to tell. Newt had to keep driving Dick Turpin onto the shoulder to avoid fallen branches. "You made me drop all the cars on the floor!" The car thumped back onto the road. A small voice from somewhere under the glove compartment said, "Oil pressure alert." "I'll never be able to sort them out now," she moaned. "You don't have to," said Newt manically. "Just pick one, any one, it won't matter." "What do you mean?" "Well, if Agnes is right and we're doing all this because she's predicted it, then any card picked right now has got to be relevant. That's logic." "It's nonsense." "Yeah? Look, you're even here because she predicted it. And if you thought that what we're going to say to the Colonel, if we ever get to see him, which of course we won't, if we're reasonable... Listen, I know these kinds of places. They have huge guards made out of teak guarding the gates, Anathema, and they have white helmets and real guns, you understand, which fire real bullets made of real lead, which can go right into you and bounce around and come out of the same hole before you can even say, 'Excuse me, we have reason to believe that World War III is due any moment, and they're going to do the show right here.' And then they have serious men in suits with bulging jackets who take you into a little room without windows and ask you questions like, 'Are you now or have you ever been a member of a pinko subversive organisation such as any British political party?' And we're nearly there. Look, it's got gates and wire fences and everything. And probably the kind of dogs that eat people." "I think you're getting rather overexcited," said Anathema quietly, picking up the last of the file cards up from the floor of the car. "Overexcited? No, I'm getting very calmly worried that someone might shoot me." "I'm sure Agnes would have mentioned if we were going to be shot. She's very good at that sort of thing." She began absent-mindedly to shuffle the file cards. "You know," she said, carefully cutting the cards and riffling the two piles together, "I read somewhere that there's a sect that believes the computers are the tools of the devil. They say that Armageddon will come about because of the Antichrist being good with computers. Apparently it's mentioned somewhere in Revelations. I think I must have read about it in a newspaper recently." "Daily Mail, letter from America. August the 3rd, said Newt. "Just after the story about the woman in Worms, Nebraska, who taught her duck to play the accordion." Said Anathema, spreading the cards face down on her lap. "So computers are the tools of the devil," thought Newt. He had no problem believing it. Computers had to be the tools of somebody, and all he knew for certain was that it definitely wasn't him. The car jerked to a halt. The airbase looked battered. Several large trees had fallen down near the entrance, and some men with a digger were trying to shift them. The guard on duty was watching them disinterestedly, but he half-turned and looked coldly at the car. "All right," said Newt. "Pick a card." 3001. "Behind the eagle's nest, a great ash hath fallen." "Is that all?" "Yes. We always thought it was something to do with the Russian Revolution. Keep going along this road and turn left." The turning led to a narrow lane with the base's perimeter fence on the left-hand side. "And now pull in here. There's often cars here and no one takes any notice," said Anathema. "What is this place?" "It's the local Lover's Lane." "Is that why it appears to be paved with rubber?" They walked along the hedge-shaded lane for 100 yards until they reached the ash tree. Agnes had been right. It was quite great. It had fallen right across the fence. A guard was sitting on it, smoking a cigarette. He was black. Newt always felt guilty in the presence of black Americans in case they blamed him for 200 years of slave trading. The man stood up when they approached and then sagged into an easier stance. "Oh, hi, Anathema," he said. "Hi, George. Terrible storm, wasn't it?" "Sure was." They walked on. He watched them out of sight. "You know him," said Newt with forced nonchalance. "Oh, sure. Sometimes a few of them come down to the pub. Pleasant enough in a well-scrubbed way." "Would he shoot us if we just walked in?" said Newt. "He might well point a gun at us in a menacing way," Anathema conceded. "That's good enough for me. What do you suggest we do, then?" "Well, Agnes must have known something, so I suppose we just wait. It's not too bad now the wind's died down." "Oh," said Newt, looking at the clouds piling up on the horizon. "Good old Agnes," he said. Adam pedaled steadily along the road, Dog running behind and occasionally trying to bite his back tire out of sheer excitement. There was a clacking noise, and Pepper swung out of her drive. You could always tell Pepper's bike. She thought it was improved by a piece of cardboard cunningly held against the wheel by a clothes peg. Katz had learned to take evasive action when she was 2 streets away. "I reckon we can cut along Drover's Lane and then up through Roundhead Woods," said Pepper. "It's all muddy," said Adam. "That's right," said Pepper nervously. "Gets all muddy up there. We ought to go along by the chalk pit. It's always dry because of the chalk. And then up by the sewage farm." Brian and Wensleydale pulled in behind them. Wensleydale's bicycle was black and shiny and sensible. Brian's might have been white once, but its color was lost beneath a thick layer of mud. "It's stupid calling it a military base," said Pepper. "I went up there when they had that open day, and they had no guns or missiles or anything. Just knobs and dials and brass bands playing." "Yes," said Adam. "Not much military about knobs and dials," said Pepper. "I don't know, really," said Adam. "It's amazing what you can do with knobs and dials." "I got a kit for Christmas," Wensleydale volunteered. "All electric bits. There are a few knobs and dials in it. You can make a radio or a thing that goes beep." "I don't know," said Adam thoughtfully. "I'm thinking more of certain people patching into the worldwide military communications network and telling all the computers and stuff to start fighting." "Cool," said Brian. "That'd be wicked." "Sort of," said Adam. It is a high and lonely destiny to be chairman of the Lower Tadfield Residents Association. R.P. Tyler, short, well-fed, satisfied, stomped down a country lane, accompanied by his wife's miniature poodle, Schutzy. R.P. Tyler knew the difference between right and wrong. There were no moral grays of any kind in his life. He was not, however, satisfied simply with being vouchsafed the difference between right and wrong. He felt it his bounden duty to tell the world. Not for R.P. Tyler, the soapbox, the polemic verse, the broadsheet. R.P. Tyler's chosen forum was the letter column of the Tadfield Advertiser. If a neighbor's tree was inconsiderate enough to shed leaves into R.P. Tyler's garden, R.P. Tyler would first carefully sweep them all up, place them in boxes, and leave the boxes outside his neighbor's front door with a stern note. Then he would write a letter to the Tadfield Advertiser. If he sighted teenagers sitting on the village green, their portable cassette players playing, and they were enjoying themselves, he would take it upon himself to point out to them the error of their ways. And after he had fled their jeering, he would write to the Tadfield Advertiser on the decline of morality and the youth of today. Since his retirement last year, the letters had increased to the point where not even the Tadfield Advertiser was able to print all of them. Indeed, the letter R.P. Tyler had completed before setting out on his evening walk had begun. "Sirs, I note with distress that the newspapers of today no longer feel obligated to their public, we the people who pay your wages." He surveyed the fallen branches that littered the narrow country road. "I don't suppose," he pondered, "they think of the cleaning up bill when they send us these storms. Parish council has to foot the bill to clean it all up, and we, the taxpayers, pay their wages." The they in this thought were the weather forecasters on Radio 4, whom R.P. Tyler blamed for the weather. He did not have a television. Or, as his wife put it, Ronald wouldn't have one of those things in the house, would you, Ronald? And he always agreed, although secretly he would have liked to have seen some of the smut and filth and violence that the National Viewers and Listeners Association complained of. Not because he wanted to see it, of course, just because he wanted to know what other people should be protected from. Schutzy stopped by a roadside beech tree to cock its leg. R.P. Tyler looked away, embarrassed. It might be that the sole purpose of his evening constitutional was to allow the dog to relieve itself, but he was dashed if he'd admit that to himself. He stared up at the storm clouds. They were banked up high in towering piles of smudged gray and black. It wasn't just the flickering tongues of lightning that forked through them like the opening sequence of a Frankenstein movie. It was the way they stopped when they reached the borders of Lower Tadfield. And in their center was a circular patch of daylight, but the light had a stretched yellow quality to it, like a forced smile. It was so quiet. There was a low roaring. Down the narrow lane came 4 motorbikes. They shot past him and turned the corner, disturbing a cock pheasant who whirred across a lane in the nervous arc of russet and green. "Vandals!" called R.P. Tyler after them. The countryside wasn't made for people like them. It was made for people like him. He jerked Schutzy's lead, and they marched along the road. 5 minutes later, he turned the corner to find 3 of the motorcyclists standing around a fallen signpost, a victim of the storm. The 4th, a tall man with a mirrored visor, remained on his bike. R.P. Tyler observed the situation and leaped effortlessly to a conclusion. These vandals, he had of course been right, had come to the countryside in order to desecrate the war memorial and to overturn signposts. He was about to advance on them sternly when it came to him that he was outnumbered 4-1, and that they were taller than he was, and that they were undoubtedly violent psychopaths. No one but a violent psychopath rode motorbikes in R.P. Tyler's world. So he raised his chin and began to strut past them, without apparently noticing that they were there. Although as a member, Reed founder, of the local neighborhood watch scheme, he did attempt to memorize the motorbike's number plates, all the while composing in his head a letter. Sirs, this evening I noted with distress a large number of hooligans on motorbicycles infesting our fair village. Why, oh why, does the government do nothing about this plague of... Hi, said one of the motorcyclists, raising his visor to reveal a thin face and a trim black beard. We're kinda lost. Ah, said R.P. Tyler disapprovingly. The signpost must have blew down, said the motorcyclist. Yes, I suppose it must, agreed R.P. Tyler. He noticed with surprise that he was getting hungry. Yeah, well, we're heading for Lower Tadfield. An officious eyebrow raised. You're Americans. With the Air Force Base, I suppose? Sirs, when I did national service, I was a credit to my country. I noticed with horror and dismay that airmen from the Tadfield Air Base are driving around our noble countryside dressed no better than common thugs. While I appreciate their importance in defending the freedom of the Western world... Then his love of giving instructions took over. You go back down that road for half a mile, then first left. It's in a deplorable state of disrepair, I'm afraid. I've written numerous letters to the council about it. Are you civil servants or civil masters? That's what I asked them. After all, who pays your wages? Then second right, only it's not exactly right. It's on the left, but you'll find it bends round toward the right eventually. It's signposted Porritt's Lane, but of course it isn't Porritt's Lane. If you look at the Ordnance Survey map, you'll see it's simply the eastern end of Forest Hill Lane. You'll come out in the village. Now you go past the Bull and Fiddle, that's a public house. And when you get to the church, I've pointed out to people who compile the Ordnance Survey map that it's a church with a spire, not a church with a tower. Indeed, I've written to the Tadfield Advertiser suggesting that they mount a local campaign to get the map corrected, and I have every hope that once these people realise with whom they are dealing, you'll see a hasty U-turn from them. Then you'll get to a crossroads. Now you go straight across that crossroads, and you'll immediately come to a second crossroads. Now you can either take the second left-hand fork, or go straight on. Either way, you'll arrive at the airbase, although the left-hand fork is almost within 1/10 of a mile shorter, and you can't miss it. Famine stared at him blankly. I'm not sure I got that, he began. I did. Let us go. Schutzy gave a little yelp and darted behind R.P. Tyler, where it remained, shivering. The strangers climbed back onto their bikes. The one in white, a hippie by the look of him, thought R.P. Tyler, dropped an empty crisp packet onto the grass shoulder. Excuse me, barked Tyler. Is that your crisp packet? Oh, it's not mine, said the boys. It's everybody's. R.P. Tyler drew himself up to his full height, 5'6". Young man, he said, how would you feel if I came over to your house and dropped litter everywhere? Pollution smiled, wistfully. Very, very pleased, he breathed. Oh, that would be wonderful. Beneath his bike, an oil slick puddled a rainbow on the wet road. Engines revved. I missed something, said War. Now why are we meant to make a U-turn by the church? Just follow me, said the tall one in front, and the four rode off together. R.P. Tyler stared after them until his attention was distracted by the sound of something going clack, clack, clack. He turned. 4 figures on bicycles shot past him, closely followed by the scampering figure of a small dog. You! Stop! Shouted R.P. Tyler. The them braked to a halt and looked at him. I knew it was you, Adam Young, and your little cabal. What, might I inquire, are you children doing out at this time of night? Do your fathers know you're out? The leader of the cyclists turned. I can't see how you can say it's late, he said. Seems to me that if the sun's still out, then it's not late. It's past your bedtime anyway, R.P. Tyler informed them. And don't stick your tongue out at me, young lady. This was to Pepper, or I will be writing a letter to your mother informing her of the lamentable and unladylike state of her offspring's manners. Well, excuse us, said Adam, aggrieved. Pepper was just looking at you. I didn't know there was any law against looking. There was a commotion on the grass. Schutzy, who was a particularly refined toy French poodle, of the kind only possessed by people who were never able to fit children into their household budgets, was being menaced by Dog. "Master Young," ordered R.P. Tyler, "please get your mutt away from my Schutzy." Tyler did not trust Dog. When he had first met the dog, 3 days ago, it had snarled at him and glowed its eyes red. This had impelled Tyler to begin a letter pointing out that Dog was undoubtedly rabid, certainly a danger to the community, and should be put down for the general good, until his wife had reminded him that glowing red eyes weren't a symptom of rabies, or, for that matter, anything seen outside of the kind of film that neither of the Tylers would be caught dead at, but knew that they all needed to know about, thank you very much. Adam looked astounded. "Dog's not a mutt," he said. "Dog's a remarkable dog. He's clever. Dog, you get off Mr. Tyler's horrible old poodle." Dog ignored him. He got a lot of dog catching up still to do. "Dog," said Adam, ominously. His dog slunk back to his master's bicycle. "I don't believe you have answered my question. Where are you four off to?" "To the airbase," said Brian. "If that's all right with you," said Adam, with what he hoped was bitter and scathing sarcasm. "I mean, we wouldn't want to go there if it wasn't all right with you." "You cheeky little monkey," said R.P. Tyler. "When I see your father, Adam Young, I will inform him in no uncertain terms that—" But the them were already pedaling off down the road in the direction of Lower Tadfield Air Base, traveling by the them's route, which was shorter and simpler and more scenic than the route suggested by Mr. Tyler. And I think that's going to be where we wrap it up today and for this week. So I will be back on Monday with another chapter, or rather, section of a chapter, and I will see everybody then. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a good weekend. Bye-bye, everyone. See you on Monday.